Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com. Welcome to the Darkstream. Today, I'm going to talk about Civil War 2.0. And I'm going to talk about the book Ages of Discord by Peter Turchin and what it has to do with the current situation that the United States is presently facing. Now, this is not a book that I would recommend to everyone, although it's an important book. Unless you're someone who regularly reads history for fun, unless you've got an IQ in the 120 and up range, this isn't going to be the book for you. It's an academic book. It's written in a very academic research style. The author, Peter Turchin, is very intelligent, but he is also very caught up in the mainstream narrative. And so you need to be aware of that and not get too carried away by, not take it as gospel truth. The way that it's interesting, what's interesting about it is that it gives you some new tools with which you can analyze the current situation. And the thing that I thought was particularly striking about it, and what I liked about it, is that Turchin makes a real effort to put things in a proper historical context. So he doesn't just come up with a thesis and apply it solely or even primarily to the situation right now, but he also applies it to other historical situations. I believe he had a recent blog post, the one that I linked to today, where he talks about how he'd applied his calculations to 30 different historical situations and taken a really intelligent approach to it. Instead of just saying, well, I think X is going to happen and taking shots in the dark, what he did was he looked at the 30 historical situations and then measured their outcomes. And what he came up with, which should be disturbing to those who think that things are always going to work out just fine, is that in 90% of the high-stress societal crises, there was what he considers to be a negative outcome. And so, what he is projecting using his own metrics, his own tools, is a situation that he considers to be mid to high level severity. And, that ranges from, serious societal disruption to full-blown civil war. Now, I personally don't subscribe to the full-blown civil war theory simply because there are no two obvious sides. I think that we're much more likely to see a breakup and a collapse of the central government, as well as the basic societal narrative, rather than two discrete sides like we had with the North and the South during the U.S. Civil War of 1861 to 1865. But what's particularly interesting about Turchin's work is that it's based on the concept of measuring societal stress. And it's very interesting to me because Turchin's politics are clearly conventional. I would guess that he is naturally of the political left by inclination and by education. But he is one of those rare breed of academics who is simply too honest to allow his inclinations, which you can see in the way that he so readily accepts the mainstream narrative and so forth in his blog posts. But he doesn't let that get in the way of drawing the reasonable and correct conclusions from the data that he gathers. And that's unusual, and that's valuable. And so what really struck me when I was reading the book, when it came out about 2 years ago, was that he ended up calculating that the level of stress in the United States, the level of societal stress in the United States in 2016 was roughly comparable to the level of societal stress seen in 1864. And that's very, very consistent with observations that you've seen from other students of history and military history, where it's been said everything that's happening in the United States, I would actually push that further. I would say everything that's happening across the West is essentially positioning for civil war. Now that may sound outrageous, that may sound extremely pessimistic, but the reality is that human society only goes so long without seeing serious conflict. And the United States has gone an incredibly long time without experiencing much serious conflict inside its borders, especially when you look at the fact that it is a fundamentally divided society, and that divided society has borne the brunt of the largest human migration in history. More people have entered the United States since 1965 than any period of human history that has been recorded. And if you look up on Infogalactic, or if you look up and read about the history of human migrations, you see that when they talk about the periods of the Great Migrations, the periods called the movement of peoples, what you see is that those migrations are always accompanied by war, always. And sometimes they're the result of war, sometimes there's the cause of war. More often, it's a combination of the two. And so, and the thing that people often do not understand, the thing that people often don't understand is that the experience of the more advanced, more technological civilization winning a war with the less advanced society is actually relatively rare, and it is really only since the advent of the Industrial Revolution that became normal. We get accustomed to thinking of a platoon of British soldiers defeating an entire army of natives, whether it's in Africa or India or in the historical United States. And yet, when you look at history, you see that ultimately the Arabs overran the Middle Eastern societies that were more advanced. You see that the Goths eventually overran Rome. The conflict usually ultimately, the Mongols overran both the Indian civilizations as well as Chinese civilization. What we're seeing in terms of the invasion of less advanced peoples and less advanced cultures conquering and fundamentally transforming the more advanced civilization is normal. And so the idea that, they're just going to become more like us, or that technology is going to win out in the end, is a false assumption. let's see here. A couple questions. Let's see. These aren't exactly small government types moving in. Well, to be honest, small government types have not been moving in since about 1820. Is it still a civil war if the conflict is between different ethnicities, religions, and cultures, which in essence means different nationalities? It's not truly a civil war. That's why I said I don't really believe that civil war is the appropriate way to describe it. But when you're going to fit it into the title of a stream, Civil War 2.0 is pithy and reasonably on target. Has America lasted this long because the geography is big? Yes. There's absolutely no way the United States would have survived if the population density wasn't as thin as it is. Come back to America and lead the battalion. We need tactical science fiction publishers to lead the charge. First of all, I'm not a tactician, I'm a strategist. Secondly, I'm an observer, not an activist. I might have been an activist if I was 20 years old at this point, where so many people recognize that there's something fundamentally wrong. But you need to keep in mind that I saw a lot of these problems, not all of them, but I did see a lot of these problems 30 years ago. I used to tell people about this stuff 30 years ago. And the almost unanimous response from everyone, friends, acquaintances, and strangers alike, was, you're crazy, that'll never happen, if you don't like it, leave. And so I did. And, I think it was the right decision. And I certainly don't mind. I actually probably can see things a little bit more clearly because of the detachment involved. It sometimes makes understanding the political issues more difficult. But, judging by the fact that I correctly called the Trump's election very early on, and correctly, would tend to indicate that perhaps the detachment helps. So, philosophical question. Do you think it's possible to bake conflict into a society to prevent the eventual broken dam effect, balkanization, and war? Well, I think to a certain extent that's what Jewish society has done. The importance of anti-Semitism, the reason that they're always seeing anti-Semitism everywhere, whether it exists or not, is because it keeps their society together. Because of their unique position in Europe, they would have, if they had not erected those barriers to intermarriage and societal acceptance, they would have disappeared into the genetic pool hundreds of years ago. And so, there obviously are ways to bake conflict into your society in order to keep it viable. But, I don't know how you would do that in a society as large as the United States of America, for example. I don't think it'd be possible for something that big. Let's see. American praxis. Stop protesting, stop LARPing, stop marching in honeypot false flags. Start to cultivate a coherent Americana identity, mythos, and ethno-faiths. Well, that all sounds great, but you don't have time. It's over in that regard. And, I think that a lot of people need to stop thinking that they're armchair strategists and that they're going to come up with some solution, because you're not, and you won't. You're much better off preparing yourself for some of the challenges that are likely to come. That's just my opinion. Is the data we have about these conflicts very reliable because we have more records from the more advanced civilizations? So there wouldn't be much data for the opposite. Yes, it's reliable because we know when the advanced civilizations were defeating the less advanced ones. We don't know anything about we don't know much about the battles between two non-advanced cultures, but that's not really relevant, is it? There are more than a dozen tribes competing for power in America. That's a new one in human history as far as I'm aware. I think that that's possibly true. I think you'd have to look pretty hard at the Roman Empire, because we tend to think of it just in terms of the families, but if you look at the ethnicities of the later empires, they were from all over the place, and so it's possible that there were tribal elements there. I don't think so. They seem to be more personality based. Whoever happened to be a general at the right time in the right place, but it's possible there. I don't think, but I do think that we are in some senses at a point in human history where we're in unexplored territory, and that makes it interesting, and that makes it a challenge to figure out what's happening. Let's see. Doing your part is getting off the internet and reproducing. That's absolutely true. If you don't have kids, you probably shouldn't be talking about how you're going to save the future. The single most important thing that you can do is have children. That's job one. The future belongs to those who show up for it. I don't know who said that first, but it's certainly applicable wisdom. Do you think all of this info about ritual sacrifices with children will become part of mainstream history? I don't see why not. It certainly has become part of history in the past. And so if it comes out in the public, then that will be written into the history, the mainstream histories. Vox, what if we just embrace empire? We already tried that. It failed. The British tried it. It destroyed them very quickly. Look at how fast Britain failed and ceased to even be a major power once they actively embraced their empire. That's a very foolish and short-sighted approach. The left doubled, then tripled down. You're right, they declared war, and it's time for bitter strength, and hopefully looking good until the lights go out. The thing that we need to give up is the idea that we're somehow going to convince the left that they're going to destroy society. They don't care. Even if you convince them, they don't care. It's like telling a fat person who has a big piece of cake in their hand, if you eat that, you're going to gain more weight. You know what? You're not really telling them anything they don't know. They don't care. Let's see. Eric Clanton's effective acquittal signaled the official end of law and order. What is left is institutional inertia. I would tend to agree with that. The fact that you couldn't do that is ridiculous. The fact that they couldn't convict somebody who had clearly and publicly and violently assaulted 7 people, and they didn't convict him for anything, just indicates that at least in California there is no more rule of law. Do you think the mixed countries with the European influence of South America will have a similar fate to the U.S.? No, I think that they've reached their accommodation. I mean, some of them will go in the direction of Venezuela, others will be more successful, but in those cases you already have you essentially have elite military rule, and so I don't see any reason how and why that would become less viable than it is now. Do you think that martial law will cause the country to congeal firstly as military sectors and governments evolve from those areas of authority first? That does sound entirely possible. That's a plausible arrangement. Let's see. Empire equals no money. Virtue signaling Uber. Oh, I'm just reading these questions here quickly. Yeah, it says, this is a good point, not only did Britain lose their empire, they are losing their homeland, and they lost their capital city a few decades after their empire collapsed. Yeah, I mean, empire is not, I mean, if you look at every empire in history, what's the one thing you notice? They always end up with some foreigner on the throne, ruling over the natives. Do you think the right will finally wake up and realize that the left will never give up and the right must hold the line, especially in the 2018 midterms? Okay, if you're talking about the 2018 midterms, you haven't woken up. Given the growth of government at all levels since the 19th century, wouldn't a move towards civil war be put down before it picked up steam? You're not understanding how the process works. The U.S. government is nowhere nearly as all-intrusive as the Soviet Union government was, and yet they couldn't keep the Soviet Union together. Government has a weight of its own. The bigger it gets, the harder it is for it to function. And eventually, it collapses under its own weight. Britain is not in as bad a shape as America demographically speaking. That's absolutely true. I haven't, unlike most, I haven't given up on Britain. I certainly haven't given up on Europe. In many ways, especially in Europe, these countries are well ahead of the U.S. in terms of their race and cultural and religious realism. Americans, for the most part, still believe in civic nationalism, even though any thinking observer realizes that it's as failed as communism or feminism. Comicsgate needs more Christian content. So far, it's mostly fat material for your average modern NPC who doesn't like social justice. Hope you can help. We're doing what we're doing with Archaven. The fact that a lot of the people in Comicsgate don't like to talk about Archaven and don't like to talk about Alt-Hero really isn't our concern. If you guys think that diversity in comics is somehow going to save it, it's not going to happen. Ethan Van Sciver is doing great stuff, with his YouTube channel, but unless they build institutionally and organizationally, whatever they do is not going to last. We've got some news coming on that front. On Monday, Ingram is sending out 4 Archaven comics to every comic store in the UK, and so hopefully a number of them are going to sign up to work with Ingram, sign up to start working with us. If you're in the UK, I'd encourage you to go into your local comic store and ask about Archaven and encourage them to carry it. Tell them you'll buy a copy or two. Hey Vox, I don't understand. So the right shouldn't beat back the Marxist left. Blah blah blah. No, you obviously don't understand. I didn't say that you shouldn't try to win elections. I'm just saying that obviously the better the right does politically, the better it is. But it's not going to solve the problem. Politics are not capable of solving the problem. I support Trump 100%. I think that he is possibly the greatest American president of all time. He's already better than Reagan. He's already better than anybody with the possible exception of Calvin Coolidge in the 19th century. 20th century. But it's not anywhere nearly enough yet. Can we submit shirt ideas to your store? You can always email me. let's see. I'm not really interested in what should I do. It just, I mean, since a lot of you watch this channel rather than read my blog, never ask me, what about me questions. I'm not interested in you. I mean, I'm barely interested in me. Okay? I like to look at ideas. I like to look at situations. I like to analyze the historical patterns. I really don't care what is best for you. I mean, I'm sorry if that's not the warm fuzzies that you're looking for, but you have to be responsible for yourself. You have to make the decisions for yourself, and asking people like me isn't a good idea. You need to. I'm just giving you the tools that you can use to analyze the situation, and then you need to reach the decision yourself. Let's see. What will happen first, world war or world economic collapse? Generally speaking, the economic collapse precedes the war. Yeah, so what do you need those of us in the States to show up to our or when do you need those of us in the States to show up to our comic shops? That's going to be in a couple weeks. The UK program is first. In the US, it's taking a little longer because we've actually arranged for Chuck Dixon to sign all the 250 copies of Avalon that are going out. So they had to send him all the books. He's signing them, sending them back. It's taking a little longer. So, let's see. How to cultivate intellect while writing full time. Contact with modernity dulls all of my mental faculties, and I can only manage 1 to 2 books a week at most. I assume you mean read 1 to 2 books a week at most. That's fine. I mean, if you're writing 1 to 2 books a week at most, you should be telling me how to do it. Reading 1 to 2 books a week is great. But make sure that you alternate. You can't read really heavy stuff all the time. Right now I've been switching. I just finished reading 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami again, and I've been reading a history of Japan. Switching between them. I've also been reading Edgar Allan Poe's crazy prophetic science poem. Can't remember the name, what it's called. Eureka. I've been reading Poe's Eureka, and then I've also been reading some of his Dupin stories. So you need to balance it. You can't just go hardcore all the time, or you end up wearing yourself out. You also can't read the mind candy, the fiction all the time, or your processes become too shallow. Do you believe in any sort of social safety net, or is even that too left-wing? I'm not sure. So many of the problems that we have right now would be eliminated by simply eliminating the social net. All of the migrants in Europe, most of them would go back to Africa or to India or to their home countries if they weren't being literally handed way more money than they can possibly make in their home countries. So I think that the cost of the social safety net is clearly far too high. Are you more optimistic than Ivan Throne? I wouldn't say that I'm more optimistic than Ivan Throne, but I'm probably more philosophical. Also, I don't think Ivan's a Christian, and so I think that he's probably a little less ultimately hopeful than I am. He doesn't have the Christian context to put the evil in. He sees the evil, but he doesn't necessarily understand it in the same way that I do. So he doesn't have the ability to put it into the same context that I do. He's a sharp guy. and he's definitely worth paying attention to. But his view does tend to run a little bit to the dark. Have you read Evola in a while? I don't enjoy reading Evola. Give me Echo every time. What's a good book on Japanese history? I don't even know the author of the one I'm reading. It's called like a brief history of Japan or something. It's pretty good though. It's actually excellent. Let me see. I can actually look it up here. Let's see. Milton W. Meyer. Japan, A Concise History. Even though I'm an East Asian Studies major, even though I lived in Japan and studied Japanese, this book has some stuff especially on the ancient period and some of the relationships with Korea and China that I didn't know very well. So I would say if you want to start with A Concise History of Japan, that's pretty good. History of Japan is better in Japanese. There's a huge amount of untranslated stuff, no question. But, that's a pretty tough. I mean, learning to read kanji is a major task that I would not recommend to anyone. Someone says Ivan is a Christian based on he may be a Christian now. I was just going on the basis of his book that we published, The 9 Laws. So, will you buy Apple's discount properties? Yeah, I'll give him $250 for it. I'm told that it's only worth $200, but I'd give him $250. So, which would you rather fight? 1 Varg-sized Shapiro or 5 Shapiro-sized Vargs? I don't know why people keep talking about me fighting Varg. I don't know the guy. I have nothing against the guy. Why would I want to fight him? So I guess I'd have to go with a Varg-sized Shapiro. Anyhow, well, that's all I've got time for tonight. But thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm not saying these things to try to get you down. I'm not saying these things to try to get you excited. I'm simply pointing out that the historical trends indicate that things are about to get a bit sporty in the societal sense. And so it's probably a good idea to take these things seriously and at least make some basic fundamental preparations. Get out of the cities if you can. Gun up a bit, make some personal connections with like-minded people in the event that things go south, as it were. But the main thing is, don't be afraid. We are simply living out history the way that hundreds of generations before us have. Sometimes we have been fortunate beyond most to be able to live in comfort and peace that very few people have known throughout history. Our luck may be running out. So have a good evening, and we will see you at the next stream. Oh, I should mention, if you want to buy the actual book, I arranged to put it on the Castelia Direct Bookstore. The link is below the YouTube stream. Have a good evening.